How do California voters feel about the state of their state? 3 field polls this week reveal they are unhappier than ever with the governor and the legislature and the structure of the state's government. Here to give us some details is Mark DiCamillo, director of the field poll. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you.
How do people feel about all of these things with an election coming up next year that could be pretty important?
Well, in a word, frustrated. Californians just are really taking it out on their elected officials. They feel the state is moving in the wrong direction. When we measure the state legislature's job rating, it's at an all-time record low. Just 13% of Californians approve of the job the legislature is doing. And for the governor, I mean, this was a governor who was up there in the 65–70% range in terms of approval at one point, and now he's down to 27%. So the mighty have fallen here, and the voters are really taking it out on their elected officials.
Do you think that might have something to do? We've talked a lot about the bills that the governor signed that he normally had vetoed in the past. Do you think it's having an effect? Do the legislators realize how frustrated people are?
Well, I think they might, but there seems little they seem to be able to do to address the problem. I think part of the problem is that voters are being asked to accept all of this pain. That is, they're being asked to accept tax increases. They're being asked to accept cuts to popular programs. Yet they don't seem to, they don't believe that the legislature is really doing much to change the culture in Sacramento. It seems to be business as usual. They're not taking any hits. They're still got their cars and their perks. And I think that frustration inside the voter's mind is really gnawing at voters and underlying why they're so upset with them.
Well, what about something that we've talked about during our entire adulthood here, changing the structure of government? Is there more of a feeling that maybe now's the time?
Well, we actually did a special poll this week where we looked at these proposals to call for constitutional reform. And in fact, Californians now believe that fundamental changes should be made to the state's constitution. They support that. A majority believes that that should happen. So when we ask them further, well, how should this take place? And they're actually quite intrigued by the idea of a constitutional convention. They would get behind that. But the problem, the rub really is, what is it that the constitutional reforms, what reforms will come out of this? And really, when we start probing the voters' views on what about tax reform, what about changing the 2/3 vote requirements in the legislature, voters recoil at that. They don't really accept those kinds of changes, yet that's where many of the constitutional reform advocates are trying to take this. And I think it's going to be a tough sell for most of the public if that's what the debate is going to be about.
Those are fundamental changes that have to, I mean, that's why we have the situation we do in terms of the vote, getting something out of the legislature, but they don't like the results. But
what they'd like ideally is for the two parties to work together. They think the best kinds of bills are bills that come out of compromise, and they're not seeing that in Washington, and they're not seeing it in Sacramento. So it's really a frustrating situation for voters, and I think they're getting to a point where they're looking for alternatives that they normally wouldn't consider.
Surprisingly to me, looking across the country at the nation, the feeling was?
Oh, it's more positive now. Since the election of Obama, I think there was this pent-up frustration of wanting George Bush out of office. It was a very long period in which voters here were just counting the days. And now that he's out and Obama's in, there was this kind of breath of fresh air. But if you look at the situation, the economy's still in the tank, and health care is problematic. I mean, even for Democrats, they look at the bill that's coming out and they don't necessarily agree with everything that's being put into this bill. But I think there's optimism about the future with Obama, and I think that's really what's contributing to this view that the nation, at least, is moving in the right direction. Whereas when you ask the same question about California, you only get about 15% who say that.
All right, not a lot of good news out of those polls, but thank you very much, Mark, for bringing us up to date there.